What's going on, everybody? I'm Scott Oots, and today we are going to talk about how I present my contracts to my sellers and buyers. Stay tuned. One of the most common questions I get is when it comes time to present a contract, how do I do it? How do I go through this with the seller to make sure they feel comfortable with what they're signing? I'm going to walk you through the seller contract today, and then I'm also going to walk you through the buyer contract today. My contracts are available, by the way, so we'll have a link here for them. Anyone can use them. Go ahead. Of course, just make sure that you have someone look over them in your state to make sure you're protected. So I use mine in California, don't have any issues, but again, I am not an attorney, and I'm going to put that out. Let's go again. I am not an attorney. Feel free to have an attorney review these because I don't want you coming back at me saying, Scott, your contract got me sued. All right, so you're sitting in front of the seller. You guys have agreed on a price. You're ready to go, but here comes the part. You got past the offer. You got the seller on board with the offer. And now you say, man, this contract, how do I present this without scaring the seller? Because that's the last thing I would want to do. I've got them agreed on price. That's the hardest part. People act like a contract is very difficult, right? Now, let's start with this. This is more of an agreement. So we're going to go ahead and talk to the seller. And we're just going to say, hey, Mrs. Smith, all right, so this is my agreement here. Basically, this says that I am going to be buying your property for $200,000. So what you're going to do, typically you're sitting across from the seller because you're not standing up doing this. That would just be odd. If you're standing, ask the seller if there's a place that you could sit down and have this conversation. Then you're sitting down across from the seller. You're actually going to flip the contract around to the seller because they should be reading it right up. If you need the contract in front of you to read, you don't know your contract well enough. So every seller's a little bit different. You can say, here's my entire agreement right here. I don't know how much you want me to go through with you. Do you want me just to touch on the main points, or would you like me to go through it line by line for you? And most sellers will say, oh, just give me the gist of it and we'll just go forward. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to hand them a pen as we get ready to do this. Now with COVID, I would suggest bringing an additional pen so they have their own, they feel comfortable, maybe pull it out of a bag so it's sterilized, something like that for them. But those are all the small details. So you're going to have your contract all filled out prior to even going to the appointment. You're going to have their property address listed in here. You're going to have the sales price listed in here, and you're going to be completely ready to go. So what you're going to do, you're going to go through the contract here before you have them actually sign, just so if they have any questions, it doesn't feel like you're pushing them to a signature. So let's go through it. So Mrs. Seller, really simple. I'm just going to outline where we are with the contract here. Basically, I pay all closing costs of escrow, title costs, document, hazard insurance, all that stuff you don't want to deal with. And of course, there's no commission. So this is all stated right here. Now, do you have insurance on the property? You do, great. Okay, because we do ask that you keep insurance on the property until you close. If you don't have it, don't worry. You don't have to go out and get it unless you want to. Title and equity, basically this here is just saying that you don't have any lawsuits coming your way that you know of that is potentially threatening the equity of this property. You may have a mortgage on there or something like that. No big deal. We'll take care of that later. Possession, basically when we close, we want you to give us the keys. Pretty simple there. Deposit, we're going to place our what's called an earnest money deposit into escrow. Escrow will contact you afterwards, let you know you got it. Now, here's the beauty of using title and escrow is they are a third party. They don't work for me. They're here for you, Mrs. Seller, and you can ask them questions. You can ask them about my business, how we do things, but ultimately we're here ready to make a deal, so let's go ahead and go forward with this here. Closing, so you said you wanted to close on the 25th, so we're going to go ahead and have that in there for you. So basically what we're going to do is we do have an attorney's fees provision in our contract. It basically just says if you and I ever get into a disagreement, we're going to try to work it out. But if something happens and we end up having to go to court, which really never happens, then there's an attorney's fees provision. in there for that. So pretty straightforward. Time is of the essence. I mean, the market shifts a lot. Could go up, could go down, but we have our times of the essence in there. Pretty simple. So all I need from you here, I just need you to go ahead and initial down here, and I'm going to need a signature from you there, and that's going to be it. So any questions on there that I can answer for you? So see how simple that is? You're not rushing the seller through the contract, but overall, I don't have any fine print in my contract. So that is so important. Don't have the font get smaller as it goes and hide things. Everything is very clear in here for me. The seller knows exactly what it is that they're signing because the font is big enough they can actually read it. We're not looking at a 50-page contract. If you look at the realtor contract, for instance, California's car form, that contract honestly is there to protect the realtor and their broker. It's not so much the person selling their property or buying a property. So it's worked for realtors for a long time, but I mean, that thing is thick and they have every single thing in there. So ours is very plain, very simple. Now, once the seller's in escrow, it's important you stay in touch with that seller. Don't forget to contact that seller throughout escrow and see how things are going. Now, I keep saying escrow because California is an escrow state. You may be an attorney state, you may work directly with title. So replace what I'm saying with escrow with title or attorneys. But make sure you stay in touch with this seller. A lot of investors get a seller into escrow, purchasing the property, and they don't talk to the seller again until it's time to pick up the keys. Now that escrow might be 30 days. Make that seller see your customer service throughout the time. We always tell them, hey, Mrs. Seller, if you have any issues throughout the process, anything that escrow's not doing for you, anything that we could do better, make sure you give us a call. And we're calling them so much. Every time we hit a milestone, Mrs. Seller, we got back your mortgage payoff. It looks like it's about $100,000. Any questions on that? Because we're ready to move to the next process or the next step in the process. So we make it very easy for them and we stay in touch with them. Now, let's go to the opposite side. So now we've got our seller contract locked in. We've determined how much we're going to put this property out for. And now we're talking to investors to see who wants to buy this contract from us. So this is our buyer contract. Very simple and straightforward. And honestly, most of the buyers that are buying from you are a little more experienced than the seller side. So you typically don't have to go through it as much. A lot of times we just send this contract over to them and say, hey, if you have any questions, let us know. But we always send it by DocuSign whenever we can. We always fill in the price prior to sending. This isn't a make an offer scenario in most cases. This is the price we're selling the house for, take it or leave it. So if a buyer comes through and asks questions about our contract, basically we tell them, let me sum this up for you in one sentence here. This is non-cancelable. Once you sign this, it's non-cancelable. That's it. So basically, we do not sell contracts to people that are going to be living in properties. We sell contracts to people that are going to be purchasing the property to rehab and resell it, or purchasing the property as an investment property, such as a rental. We're not a realtor. We're not crossing that line. We're not out attempting to find retail buyers that are going to go get a 30-year fixed loan on these properties. That's not our goal, and it's not something we do. We work directly with investors that are looking to purchase investment properties. That's what we're doing here. So basically, very simple through the buyer contract. This one here, buyer pays all closing costs, so that's outlined here in the contract. It does guarantee to the buyer that we will provide a insurable and marketable title, which means we're not going to provide them a clouded title on a property because they're not going to be able to resell it. So that's our guarantee to them. Of course, they are to do all of their due diligence prior to signing our contract. Once they sign our contract, it is non-cancelable, which means they need to go to the city if they have any questions. If they want to verify validity of permits, it says that in here as well. They need to make sure that they do that prior to signing our contract, because once they sign it, they're locked in. So basically, we will provide possession to them at the time of closing. Very simple. Obviously, they're going to want possession of the property they're buying, as is condition. So that's important on there as well. Attorney's fees provision is very important when you're looking at a buyer contract, because if your buyer doesn't perform, you have the right as long as you have a full executed contract, to go after them for your potential lost assignment fees. Now, you have to also weigh the cost of doing that. If your assignment fee is 10 grand, it's going to cost you 30 grand in 2 years to go after someone. It doesn't make sense. But you have to make those business decisions on your own. On the second page here, we have our EMD amount from our buyers, so the earnest money deposit. So we always have our buyers put in 2% or $8,000. Now, whichever one is greater. Now keep in mind, we're in California. Our prices of houses are much higher. If you're over there in the East Coast or Midwest and you've got a $30,000 house, you're not going to get an $8,000 EMD in most cases. We have a high EMD put in to weed the people out that are potentially going to waste our time. So in the past, we asked for a $1,000 EMD. We'd get a lot of wholesalers that come lock up the property, then fight us to try to get the EMD back when they can't assign it. So we made our EMD high enough that it brings in the real buyers. And that's what you're looking for. You're not looking for wholesalers in most cases to lock up a property while they go out and try to do this. You want to have buyers that want to actually close on the property. So then when we get down to the bottom part of the contract here, we've got some bullet points. And the bullet points are talking about no financing contingency, it's cash buyers only. So even if they're getting hard money, they have to already know they're being approved for that hard money prior to signing our contract. All due diligence needs to be done. So again, non-cancelable agreement. And you could put this on your contract 50 times, non-cancelable, 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 and you're still gonna have buyers that call in and just say, I'm canceling. They just don't understand, they don't care. So you need to make sure you really set the expectation for these buyers ahead of time. Again, buyer understand it's non-cancelable. This is a legally binding contract. It shows here that we have the right to do an assignment of the contract on this property. So we are not the owner of the property. We are simply a contract holder, and we are assigning our interest in that contract over to the buyer. So very simple process. Now, we are assigning this seller contract to this buyer. We're marrying these up. So your buyer is agreeing to the terms of this seller contract. And one of the biggest things I see posted out on Facebook all the time is, well, my buyer wants to see my seller contract. Well, yeah, of course they will. If you're assigning your interest in the property, the buyer's gonna wanna see the contract, what they're being assigned. This is the terms that they're being assigned. So if I'm telling the seller we will do A, B, and C in this document, but we're not showing that to the buyer, that's not right. We have to show the buyer that what we are assigning to them. So here's what you can do. A lot of people say, well, they're gonna know my wholesale fee. Just because you're sending the buyer a copy of a contract doesn't mean you have to send them your actual signed copy with all your seller's information on it. You can send them a blank copy if you want. You can redact the price. You can redact the seller's name on it and send them that. You can do different things, but bottom line, your buyer, if you're signing it, needs to know the terms of this agreement. This agreement is very important because what if it says on here that buyers to give $20,000 extra to seller at the close of escrow, right? They would need to know that because their offer needs to be adjusted accordingly based on the terms in this agreement. What if your seller contract says buyer to allow seller to stay in the property for 90 days after close? You don't tell that to the buyer because it's in this contract, but you never provide them this contract to see it. They have to see the contract with your seller. Now, if you're double closing, you're doing something like that, you're bringing funds to close, closing on the property in your company name, and then reselling that, then they wouldn't be bound to these terms. But you would be bound to these terms because you've entered into an agreement with the seller. So if you tell the seller you get 90 days in the property after close, and then you're going to turn around, sell the property to another investor, you're still bound by the terms with this seller. So most likely you're not going to be able to sell the property for 90 days unless you get a seller or a buyer that's in agreement to be able to take those terms on. So very simple. It comes down to transparency. When you're talking to your seller, you need to be very transparent. Don't tell your seller that you're the buyer if you're not. Don't tell your buyer you're the contract holder if you're not, because you've got to understand that. There's a lot of wholesalers that go out there. I put a property out for $200,000 or a contract out for $200,000, and another wholesaler marks it up to 205, starts acting like it's their contract. This happens a lot. That's called daisy chaining. That happens in California a lot. I know a lot of people that have experienced it. So be honest every step of the way. My company has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, and it's so important to get positive reviews. Positive reviews on both the buyer side and the seller side. So make sure as you're conducting business and you're building your contracts, there's protections for the seller in there, and there's also protections for the person you're assigning the contract to, the buyer. And remember, if you're assigning, you are not selling houses. Let me make that very clear. You are not selling houses. You are simply assigning your contract from your seller. You're assigning your equitable interest in this contract to an investor buyer. Your buyer is buying this contract, this piece of paper, for a fee. And if your wholesale fee is potentially 10 grand, he's buying this piece of paper that gives him the right to buy the house for $10,000. So I hear the terminology wrong with so many people. They say, oh yeah, I'm selling this house. You're not selling the house. Now, if you owned the house, if you double closed it, actually closed on it with your funds, then you can sell the house as a for sale by owner. But you're not a realtor, well, unless you have a licensed realtor, but you need to be very careful with that. You are simply assigning your contractual interest. So contracts are very important. Now, I've heard a lot of people say, well, Scott, just give me your contract. I have no problem giving you my contract. I'm going to provide it to anyone watching the video. But here's the problem. Do not assume my contract works for you. You should always have a contract reviewed by an attorney. And yes, this is going to cost you money, and it's not going to be $100, right? I've spent thousands getting my contracts to where I need them to be. Now, just because I know how to use my contracts, and I use my contracts as my attorney specified, doesn't mean you're going to use the contracts in the exact same way. Your contract needs to be suited for your business, how you're marketing, how you're doing your deals, whether you're signing, whether you're double closing. There's so many different things. Like, I wouldn't use this for a sub-2 transaction or any type of seller financing. I need to have a contract specific to that. So I've seen people get sued for having holes in their contracts, not performing on contracts. The last thing you want to do is get sued. Then you come back to me and say, hey Scott, I got this contract from you and I'm getting sued for $100,000. First question, is you have an attorney look it over and make sure that it works for what you're doing? The answer is going to be, well, no, I didn't have money to do that. Okay, well, do you have money for a $100,000 lawsuit, right? You've got to understand this. And I'm not saying go spend thousands of dollars doing something, but you need to have your contract reviewed. That is very important. So that's simple. That is basically all of our contracts, how we do things, how we present to the seller, what the buyer is signing for us. So hopefully this helped you guys. My contracts are available to you. I don't charge for that. I think it's cool for you guys to be able to have some type of jump start. So hopefully this helped you guys. We'll talk to you next time.